never thought the word millionaire would ever apply to me, but yesterday everything changed. At 28 years old, I woke up grieving the death of my aunt, and by the end of that same day, I had inherited more than most people dream of in a lifetime. $2 million in cash, a sprawling Victorian mansion on 2 acres of land, full ownership of her business empire worth millions more. The weight of it was staggering, but the real shock wasn't the fortune. It was who showed up the moment I received it. 15 years ago, my parents abandoned me. No warning, no long goodbye, just a note and an empty apartment. I learned to live without them, taught myself not to hope for their return, and built my world with the one person who stayed. My Aunt Vivien. She became my anchor, my mentor, and eventually my true family. And now, standing in the lawyer's office at the will reading, they appeared. The same parents who left me at 13, suddenly smiling as if no time had passed. My mother's voice was sweet, rehearsed, "We are your guardians." My father's nod carried the arrogance of someone who thought he had a claim to everything I had been given. It was surreal, like seeing ghosts materialize not for love, not for reconciliation, but for money. Their timing was too perfect, their words too carefully chosen. In that moment, a dozen emotions collided: grief, confusion, anger, and a painful flicker of longing I wished I didn't feel. They were strangers, yet they carried my face in theirs. They were my parents, but they had forfeited that role long ago. Still, here they were, inserting themselves back into my life on the very day my aunt's last gift became mine. And before I could even find my voice to respond, my lawyer walked into the room. His presence shifted everything. The look on my parents' faces turned pale, almost fearful. They knew their act was about to unravel. What followed was a battle not just over wealth, but over the meaning of family, loyalty, and betrayal. Before the chaos, before the abandonment, before I learned what betrayal really feels like, my life looked deceptively ordinary. If you had asked 13-year-old me to describe my family, I would have told you that we were simple, modest, and happy. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment, nothing fancy, but it was enough. My father worked as a sales manager at a local car dealership, always in pressed shirts that smelled faintly of car polish and cologne. My mother taught 3rd grade at the elementary school nearby, her laugh bright and her hands always carrying stacks of graded papers. We had our routines, and for a while they gave me the illusion of stability. Friday nights were sacred, movie night with microwave popcorn, blankets piled on the couch, and the comfort of knowing that for a few hours everything was lighthearted. Summer meant camping trips in a second-hand tent that always leaked when it rained, but those trips felt like adventures. Christmas mornings were my favorite. Hot chocolate with too many marshmallows, the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven, and my parents teasing each other as they handed out gifts. Looking back now, I can see the cracks forming long before everything collapsed. As a child, though, I didn't recognize them. The hushed arguments behind closed doors, the way my father's phone calls grew longer and more secretive, the overtime shifts that brought him home smelling of cigarettes and alcohol rather than car wax. All of it slid past me because I wanted to believe we were fine. My mother changed too. Her once bright eyes dulled, her energy fading as she spent more time behind drawn curtains, calling in sick to work. Some days, she looked at me as if she were memorizing my face, then burst into tears without accent. Playnation. I thought the solution was to be perfect. I studied harder, brought home good grades, kept the apartment spotless, and tried not to ask for new clothes even when mine were worn thin. I convinced myself that if I behaved, if I carried the weight quietly, everything would return to the way it was. After all, that's what children do. They blame themselves because the alternative, that the people you rely on most are breaking apart, feels too terrifying. It's strange how the happiest memories and the darkest signs can live side by side. The laughter during game nights, the comfort of my mother brushing my hair, the warmth of my father cheering at a school recital, they existed alongside the slammed doors, the growing silences, and the empty refrigerator. I didn't know that my father's friendly poker nights had already become something darker. I didn't understand that my mother's tears weren't weakness, but the weight of depression pressing her down. I only knew that something was slipping and I couldn't stop it. Still, I clung to the image of us as a family because that's what kept me safe at night. That's what made me believe tomorrow would always look like yesterday. I had no idea that those small comforts, popcorn some popcorn on Fridays, cinnamon rolls on Christmas, would become the last threads holding together a story about to unravel completely. What I didn't know then was that those threads would snap all at once on a Tuesday in October. And from that moment forward, the word family would never mean the same thing again. Some days tattoo themselves into your memory so deeply that even time cannot fade them. For me, that day was a Tuesday in October, a day colder than it should have been for early fall, and the day my parents vanished. I remember waking up late, the kind of late where panic sets in because mom hadn't called me for breakfast or nagged me about being on time for school. The silence felt wrong, heavy, almost staged. The apartment, usually filled with the sounds of clattering dishes or dad's radio humming in the background, was still. Too still. Their bedroom door stood wide open, which in itself was strange. Mom always kept it closed on her bad days, as if privacy could shield her sadness from me. Now the door gaped like an open wound. Inside, the closet was half empty, hangers swinging loosely. Drawers were pulled out, but instead of neat stacks of clothes, only stray socks and forgotten scraps remained. My heart raced as I moved through the room, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. In the kitchen, my world broke apart with 16 words. A single piece of paper, folded in half, sat on the counter. My mother's handwriting, the same loops and curls I had once traced with crayons as she graded spelling tests, delivered the blow. Elaine, we cannot do this anymore. Your Aunt Vivien will take care of you. We are sorry. That was it. No explanation, no promises, no plan. 13 years of life with them, reduced to a note that could barely fill half a page. I called my mother's phone until my fingers hurt, each ring slicing into my chest. No answer. I tried my father's number, but it was already disconnected. I searched drawers for address books, scraps of paper, anything that might tell me where they'd gone. Nothing. It was as if they had erased themselves overnight. Fear settled in quickly. What if no one found out? What if social services came and put me in foster care? What if my parents returned and I wasn't there? I spent that first night curled on the living room couch, surviving on cereal and hope. I told myself this had to be temporary. They'd walk back through the door any minute, apologizing, explaining, undoing what had just happened. But they didn't. On the second day, our landlord came knocking. His sharp voice demanded rent my parents had clearly stopped paying. I stammered something about them being away, but his suspicion was obvious. He muttered about calling social services, and I felt the ground beneath me begin to crumble. By the third day, desperation won. I called my school counselor, trembling as I confessed what had happened. Within hours, Child Protective Services arrived. The woman who came, Miss Dawson, had kind eyes and a calm voice. She explained everything gently, as if wrapping me in words like a blanket. You can't stay here alone anymore, Elaine. We'll find a solution. Her solution came with a name I barely recognized. Aunt Vivien. My father's older sister. A woman I'd met maybe twice in my entire life. A woman who had always seemed like a distant figure my parents didn't approve of. Miss Dawson made the call in front of me, her tone businesslike but pleading. Your niece has been abandoned. She has no one else. Foster care is the only alternative. After a long silence, Vivien agreed to come the very next morning. That night, I sat in the dim light of our living room, staring at the note again and again. My parents' words blurred with my tears, each repetition cutting deeper. It wasn't just the abandonment, it was the finality. The choice had been made. I wasn't enough to stay for. In the morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside, so different from the rusting sedan my father used to drive. Out stepped Aunt Vivien, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her tailored suit so polished it made her look untouchable. She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She simply said, "Pack what you can carry." And with that, my old life ended. I left behind the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, the childhood books on the shelf, and the faint hope that my parents might come back. I walked out karaoke, nang only a suitcase and the beginnings of a wound that would take years to even begin to heal. When I think back to that first day with Aunt Vivien, the memory feels like stepping into another universe. One moment, I was a terrified 13-year-old clutching a suitcase in a half-empty apartment, and the next, I was sitting in the back of a sleek black car that hummed quietly as it carried me away from everything I had ever known. Vivien wasn't the kind of aunt who greeted you with hugs or soft reassurances. She was precise, efficient, and coolly determined. "Pack what you can carry," she had said at the door, her tone clipped but not unkind. It was as if she had already accepted the role of guardian, not out of love or sentiment, but out of a sense of duty that was unshakable. For me, that was terrifying and comforting at the same time. The drive to her home lasted 3 hours, though it felt like a blur. Vivien spoke only when necessary. "Do you need water? Hungry? bathroom break? But otherwise kept her eyes on the road. I stared out the window as the city faded into suburbs, then into wide stretches of countryside. My world was shrinking in the rearview mirror, while ahead of me waited something unknown. When we finally pulled through the wrought iron gates of her property, I realized how vast her world was compared to mine. The Victorian mansion loomed above perfectly manicured gardens, its windows glowing faintly in the dusk. I had never seen a house so large outside of movies. To me, it felt more like a museum than a home. Inside, everything was meticulous. Heavy velvet curtains, polished hardwood floors, antique furniture that looked far too expensive to touch. My bedroom alone was larger than our entire apartment, complete with a 4-poster bed and shelves lined with books I couldn't yet imagine reading. But instead of feeling thrilled, I felt small. Guest in someone else's carefully ordered life. From the very beginning, Vivien established rules. Breakfast at 7 sharp, beds made before leaving for school, no shoes on the hardwood floors, homework at the desk, never on the couch or bed, piano practice for 1 hour every day, whether I had talent or not. Dinner conversation had to include one current event and one personal achievement. Television was forbidden on school nights. To a grieving, angry teenager, these rules felt suffocating. I tested every boundary, skipping practice, sneaking snacks, staying up past curfew, almost daring her to send me away. Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to prove she would eventually abandon me too. But unlike my parents, Vivien never threatened to leave. Every broken rule brought a consequence, delivered calmly and logically, but never with cruelty. Missed breakfast, the kitchen closed at 7:30, and I simply went without. Failed to complete homework. Weekend plans canceled. It was discipline without malice, structure without punishment. And in those small, steady acts, she was teaching me something. Consistency. Unlike the chaos I had grown used to, Vivien's world ran on order. And while I resisted it at first, some part of me began to crave the predictability. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't bracing for sudden explosions of anger or tears. Beneath her rigid exterior, there were glimpses of something more. Once she found me crying over an old photograph of my parents. Instead of scolding me, she handed me a handkerchief and sat quietly by my side until the tears stopped. Another time, when I failed a math test despite hours of studying, she didn't criticize me. She hired a tutor. Her way of caring wasn't warm words or tender hugs, it was action. Solutions. A silent but undeniable presence. Over the months, the fear of being left again began to loosen its grip. I realized Vivien wasn't here to replace my parents. She wasn't here to play the role of the mother who baked cookies or the father who cheered at games. She was something else, solid, dependable, immovable. In her own way, she was showing me that love didn't always sound like, I love you. Sometimes it sounded like, pack what you can carry, or finish your homework first, or let's hire a tutor. It wasn't the kind of family I had lost, but slowly I began to understand it was a new kind of family I could trust. Living with Aunt Vivien was like being enrolled in the most demanding school of life imaginable. Every detail of her household ran with precision, and though I often resisted it in the beginning, I slowly began to realize that her rules were not about control for its own sake. They were about building habits that would carry me through the storms of adulthood. At first, I hated the rigidity. Breakfast at exactly 7 felt unbearable when all I wanted was to bury my head in the pillow and pretend the world didn't exist. Piano practice was torture, especially since I had no talent and even less interest. Dinner conversations about current events seemed pointless when all I cared about was escaping the weight of my own grief. But Vivien never wavered. To her, these routines weren't negotiable. They were the foundation of discipline, and discipline, she believed, was the scaffolding for success. Her philosophy was simple. Life is unpredictable, people are unreliable, but routines are anchors. And slowly, I discovered she was right. When I sat at the piano each night, my fingers stumbling over keys, I hated every second. Yet, over time, I noticed a strange shift. My ability to focus improved, my patience stretched further than before. Even when I wasn't learning music, I was learning persistence. School became another battlefield. My old public school hadn't prepared me for the demands of Westfield Academy, the private school Vivien insisted I attend. The students came from wealthy families, their confidence polished like their expensive shoes. I felt like an imposter dragging along my scars and secondhand clothes. The coursework was brutal, the teachers uncompromising, and I struggled to keep up. I cried more than once over geometry proofs or long essays, convinced I would never belong. One evening, frustrated beyond words, I accused Vivien of trying to control me, of forcing me into a life that wasn't mine. She listened calmly, then delivered words that I never forgot. Your circumstances change through no action of your own, Elaine, but your response to those circumstances is entirely your choice. You can use this opportunity or you can waste it, but I do not invest in lost causes. It wasn't the tender encouragement I wanted, but somehow it steadied me. She wasn't pitying me, she was challenging me, and a challenge I realized was exactly what I needed. I began to push myself. I hired a peer tutor with my allowance. I formed study groups with classmates. I spent long nights at my desk retraining my mind to fight through doubt instead of surrendering to it. By junior year, I had not only caught up, but made the honor roll. For the first time since my parents left, I felt like I was building something of my own, a future carved from effort, not just survival. Vivien reinforced this lesson outside the classroom too. She often brought me along to business meetings on weekends, instructing me to observe quietly. Watch who speaks first, notice who concedes points, pay attention to the body language. Business is human psychology applied to commerce. At the time, I rolled my eyes, but those lessons sank deeper than I realized. I began to see patterns in people, the way confidence could command a room, or how silence could be more powerful than words. She was shaping me into someone who could not only survive, but thrive. Looking back, those years under Vivien's roof weren't just about rules or routines, they were about transformation. She took a girl who had been abandoned, who thought perfection was the only way to be loved, and showed her that structure, discipline, and resilience were far more powerful than perfection. I didn't always thank her, I didn't always appreciate her methods, but the lessons stuck, becoming the invisible backbone of the person I was slowly becoming. By the time I entered college, I was no longer the same frightened, abandoned girl who had stepped into Vivien's house years earlier. I carried scars, yes, but I also carried something else. A resilience forged by discipline, a mindset shaped by Vivien's relentless insistence on structure, and a growing belief that I could carve out my own path. The transition to university life was daunting. I had chosen Northwestern, a prestigious school that intimidated me from the moment I set foot on campus. Students strolled past me with effortless confidence, talking about summer internships abroad, legacy connections, and career plans already mapped out. I felt like an outsider again, a girl from a broken home with a complicated past, dropped into a sea of privilege. But this time, I had tools Vivien had given me. I approached college with the same mindset she had drilled into me during high school: observe, adapt, persist. I joined clubs even when I felt awkward. I reached out to professors for help even when I was nervous. I pushed myself into situations that scared me because I knew Vivien would never accept surrender. Slowly, the fear gave way to competence. I discovered I had a natural gift for marketing and design, a knack for connecting ideas with people, for telling stories that made products feel personal. It was almost ironic. My father had been a salesman, but where his pitches had been about quick wins and charm, mine were about strategy and vision. And unlike him, I wasn't gambling away opportunities. I was building them. Summers were never idle. Vivien insisted I intern at her company, Hughes Home Collections, learning every layer of the business from inventory to vendor relations. At first, I resented it. While my friends spent summers traveling or relaxing, I was buried in spreadsheets and product meetings. But over time, I saw the gift she was giving me: real-world training, experience that would set me apart after graduation. Our relationship shifted too. Distance softened her edges. During my college years, our Sunday phone calls became less formal. For the first time, I heard her laugh, really laugh, at one of my stories. She no longer hovered as a strict guardian. Instead, she became a mentor, even a confidant. By the time I walked across the stage to receive my degree, I saw pride in her eyes that she didn't bother to hide. She gave me a firm handshake, but her expression said everything words could not. After graduation, I returned to live at the mansion and took a position as marketing director for her company. By then, I wasn't just her niece, I was her protege, her right hand, the person she trusted with a legacy she had built from scratch. We shared meals in silence sometimes, other times exchanging sharp debates about business strategy. And while she never softened into the kind of maternal figure I had once longed for, she became something equally powerful. A steady partner in shaping a future neither of us could have built alone. I began dating occasionally, though Vivien's disapproval often, and hovered in the background. She never said outright that I should avoid relationships, but her subtle discouragement made it clear she didn't want anything to derail my focus. At first, I resented that too, but part of me understood. She had invested everything into preparing me to succeed, and she didn't trust anyone else not to squander that potential. Looking back, those post-college years were the peak of our partnership. I was building a career, she was beginning to step back, and together we had found a rhythm that worked. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But life has a way of interrupting triumph with tragedy, and just when I thought I was finally free of abandonment, fate reminded me that even the strongest anchors cannot last forever. Just as my career and my life seemed to be finding solid ground, the foundation beneath me shifted again. 2 years after I had returned from college and settled into my role at Hughes Home Collections, Vivien received the diagnosis that would change everything: pancreatic cancer. The doctor's words landed like a thunderclap, though Vivien herself remained unshaken. She listened calmly, asked precise questions, and thanked the physician with her usual poise. When we returned to the car, I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Vivien placed a firm hand on mine and said in her steady, unsentimental way, "We all die. The only variables are when and how we use the time before that happens." That was Vivien, pragmatic, unsentimental, but unwavering. She continued working as long as her strength allowed, attending meetings even when fatigue painted her face pale. But gradually the balance shifted. Responsibilities that had once been hers became mine. At first, it felt overwhelming. A company, employees, decisions that could ripple across hundreds of lives, yet she guided me step by step, ensuring I was prepared to lead when she no longer could. The shift in our relationship was profound. For years, she had been the one enforcing rules, challenging me to rise higher. Now I became her caretaker. I was the one monitoring medications, arranging doctor appointments, and urging her to rest when her body betrayed her. And in those moments, beneath the steel exterior she had always presented, a surprising softness began to emerge. One evening, after helping her into bed, she gripped my hand with more strength than her frail frame should have allowed. Her voice, usually crisp and sharp, trembled with vulnerability. "You were the daughter I never allowed myself to have. Taking you in was the best decision of my life." Those words shattered something inside me. For 15 years, I had longed for a mother's love, and in that single confession, Vivien gave it to me. She had never once said the words, "I love you," aloud, but in that moment, I realized she didn't need to. Her actions had always spoken for her. 8 months later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. The house was suddenly too large, too silent, echoing with memories of her presence. Her footsteps down the hall, the scratch of her pen over business reports, the clipped sound of her voice calling my name. At the funeral, attended mostly by business associates and a few distant relatives, I stood at her graveside and realized that while she had not given me life, she had given me everything else. The grief was suffocating at times. I would catch myself setting aside articles I thought she might find interesting, only to remember she was gone. I would listen for her keys jangling in the door, knowing the silence would stretch on forever. But alongside the grief was determination. She had spent years preparing me to lead, to carry her legacy forward. I could not let that preparation go to waste. So, I returned to the office. I ran the business as she had taught me, honoring her not just with words, but with action. Every decision I made carried the weight of her influence. Every success felt like proof that her faith in me had not been misplaced. Vivien left me more than wealth. She left me her name, her principles, her vision of what it meant to live with purpose. And as I carried her legacy forward, I had no idea that fate was preparing yet another test, one that would force me to confront the ghosts of my past. 3 weeks after Vivien's funeral, I received the letter, heavy cream-colored stationery embossed with the name Harold Thompson, attorney at law. Inside, in formal script, was the notification that Aunt Vivien's will would be read the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I expected it to be a simple, if somber, formality. I imagined I would sit with Mr. Thompson, perhaps a few of Vivien's executives or longtime employees, and hear the details of what she had left behind. Instead, that day became the most surreal of my life. I arrived early, dressed in a navy suit Vivien would have approved of. Thompson's office smelled of leather and polished wood, the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time. I tried to distract myself with a magazine, but my mind wandered to Vivien's voice, her lectures about preparation and foresight. When the door opened, I looked up expecting to see one of her business associates. Instead, my heart nearly stopped. Standing in the doorway were two faces I had not seen in 15 years. My parents. For a moment, the world tilted. My father's once dark hair was now gray and thinning. His shoulders, once strong, slumped under invisible weight. My mother, thinner and paler than I remembered, smiled as though no time had passed, but the smile never reached her eyes. "Ela," my father said, his voice rough and uneven. "Look at you, all grown up." I froze. My mother stepped forward, arms outstretched, and wrapped me in an embrace I could not return. The scent of her perfume was both familiar and foreign, a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. "We've been trying to find you," she said sweetly, examining me as though I were a stranger. "You look so much like your aunt now, so sophisticated." My voice barely worked as I asked, "How did you know about today?" "We saw the obituary," my father explained with a smile that felt rehearsed. "We've been keeping tabs from afar." Of course, they had known where I was all along, for years, and yet they had never reached out. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not even to ask if I was alive. Only now, after Vivien's death and the promise of her estate, did they suddenly reappear. Thompson entered then, silver-haired and calm, greeting me warmly. His presence seemed to drain the color from my parents' faces. They exchanged quick glances, shifting uneasily as we all took our seats. The will was read aloud with formal precision. The estate, including Vivien's mansion, her business empire, her personal assets, and more than $2 million in liquid funds, was left entirely to me. My parents leaned forward slightly, a subtle but unmistakable gesture that revealed why they were really there. When Thompson finished, silence filled the room. My father coughed lightly, breaking it. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson," he began. "Is there anything else?" "There are small bequests to longtime employees," Thompson replied, nodding toward Mrs. Bentley, Vivien's housekeeper who had joined us, "as well as charitable provisions, but yes, the estate passes in full to Elaine." My mother's smile tightened. She reached for my hand, patting it as though I were still a child. "Well, this is quite a responsibility for someone so young. Fortunately, as her parents, we're here to help." My father added smoothly, "Legally speaking, since Elaine was a minor when Vivien took her in and our parental rights were never formally terminated, we remain her guardians. We'd be happy to assist with managing these assets until she has more life experience." Their words sent a chill down my spine. Guardians, after 15 years of silence, the audacity left me speechless. Before I could respond, Thompson interjected, his voice calm but firm. "I believe there's some confusion about legal status. We'll reconvene tomorrow with the proper documentation." He looked directly at me, a quiet reassurance in his eyes. My parents nodded, though their disappointment was barely concealed. As they gathered their things, my mother whispered, "We'll have lunch tomorrow, sweetheart. We have so much to talk about." The door closed behind them and my knees nearly gave out. I turned to Thompson, voice trembling. "They don't really have any claim, do they?" He gave me a grave look. "Prepare yourself, this won't be easy, but remember," she shrugged. "Your aunt was wise. She didn't leave you unprotected." In that moment, I realized the battle wasn't just about money. It was about the life I had built, the family I had lost, and the woman who had given me everything when my parents had given me nothing. That night, after the will reading, I barely slept. My parents' sudden reappearance had cracked open wounds I thought I had sealed long ago. The way they spoke, alternating between affection and entitlement, made my skin crawl. They wanted control, not connection, and yet Thompson's somber warning haunted me. "Prepare yourself. This won't be easy." Around 3 a.m, unable to quiet my mind, I found myself wandering into Vivien's study. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, mixed with the leather of her neatly arranged files. For years, I had known this room as her domain. The place where she built strategies, studied reports, and managed the empire she created from nothing. Now it was mine, and with it came the weight of protecting everything she had entrusted to me. I opened drawer after drawer, searching for answers. Finally, behind a locked compartment I had never seen before, I discovered a folder labeled simply Winters. My heart raced as I pulled it free. Inside were documents, investigator reports, and notes written in Vivien's precise handwriting. The truth unfolded in layers. When my parents abandoned me, they hadn't simply vanished. Vivien had fought to secure legal guardianship, then eventually adoption. Court papers showed my parents had been contacted multiple times but never appeared for hearings. Even more shocking, affidavits with their signatures consenting to permanent guardianship had surfaced, signatures they later claimed were forgeries. But Vivien hadn't trusted paperwork alone. She had hired private investigators who tracked my father's gambling sprees in Nevada and documented my mother working as a cocktail waitress in casinos. They confirmed my parents had explicitly agreed to give up their rights, sometimes even in exchange for money. One report chilled me to the core, a payment of $15,000 from a man named Louis Barker directly to my father the day after the affidavits were filed. The note beside it, written in Vivien's hand, read, "He sold his rights. Elaine must never know until she is strong enough to face this truth." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept reading. Over the years, my parents had attempted to contact Vivien, not out of love for me, but to extort money. One report documented my father demanding $50,000, threatening to challenge guardianship unless Vivien paid him off. Another described my mother claiming she had cancer and begging for treatment money, which investigators confirmed was false. They had even tried to use my college acceptance as leverage, requesting tuition money to rebuild our relationship with Elaine. Vivien had shielded me from it all. She had quietly paid once against her better judgment, then refused every attempt thereafter. She had kept records, photographs, even recordings of phone calls, preparing for the day they might try again. At the very bottom of the file was a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Elaine," it began, "if you are reading this, it means your parents have reappeared, as I always suspected they would. I shielded you from their attempts to exploit you because I wanted you to heal without carrying the burden of their betrayals. But now, you must know the truth. You were legally adopted at 16. You are my daughter in every way that matters. They have no claim to you or to what I have left in your care. Whatever you choose about your relationship with them, let it be your choice, not theirs. Blood is not a currency. Family is built through consistent love and sacrifice. I am proud of the woman you have become. All my love, Vivien." I set the letter down, tears spilling onto the paper. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared me for it in her meticulous, relentless way. And now, even from beyond the grave, she was still protecting me. The next morning, I walked into Thompson's office with the file in my hand and resolve in my heart. My parents might try to twist the past, but I now carried proof of the truth. And the voice of the only parent who had ever truly stayed. The following afternoon, I returned to Thompson's office. My parents were already there, seated stiffly beside a thin man with slicked-back hair who introduced himself as Gerald Hoffman, their attorney. "Just a precaution," my father explained smoothly. "Legal matters can be complicated." But the atmosphere was less like a family reunion and more like a courtroom. Thompson's assistant wheeled in a cart stacked with fighting eels. I clutched Vivien's Winters folder tightly in my hands. Today wasn't just about inheritance, it was about truth. Hoffman began with confidence. "My clients are concerned about their daughter's sudden inheritance of such substantial assets. As her legal guardians, they have a responsibility to ensure proper management." Thompson didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses and opened a file. "Let's address this confusion. When Elaine came into Vivien Hughes's care, temporary guardianship was established. After 6 months of failed attempts to contact you, the court scheduled a permanent guardianship hearing. Notices were sent, even published in legal journals. You never appeared." My mother frowned. "We never received anything. We were moving constantly, struggling." "Indeed," Thompson replied evenly. "Yet someone appeared claiming to represent you." He pulled out another document. "A man named Louis Barker filed affidavits, allegedly signed by both of you, consenting to the transfer. Miss Hughes doubted the validity, so she hired a private investigator." He slid photographs across the table. My father at casino tables, my mother serving drinks in cocktail lounges. Reports documenting that when approached, they confirmed they wanted no responsibility for me. The color drained from my mother's face. "And there's more," Thompson continued. "The investigator also recorded a payment, $15,000, made to Mr. Winters the very next day. A payment tied directly to those affidavits. That was unrelated," my father snapped. Though his voice faltered, Thompson ignored the protest and produced another document. "Vivien adopted Elaine legally when she was 16. Here are the court papers. Signed, sealed, and final. They are binding. You have no legal standing here." I opened the letter Vivien had left me and read it aloud. Every word cut through the room like a blade. How they had tried to extort money, how she had shielded me, how she had adopted me as her daughter in every way. In the weeks after the final confrontation, my parents' presence faded as quickly as it had appeared. Thompson filed restraining orders, and the law sealed the distance between us. For the first time in years, the ghosts of my past no longer had power over me. Still, I wasn't left with triumph alone. I was left with the silence that follows a storm, when everything feels raw, fragile, and new. The mansion, once so full of Vivien's presence, felt unbearably empty at first. I caught myself listening for her footsteps, saving clippings of articles I thought she'd enjoy, pausing before decisions I wished she could advise me on. Grief, I learned, doesn't vanish just because a battle has been won. It lingers, surfacing in unexpected places, in the garden where we'd once shared coffee, in the study where she trained me to see beyond numbers, into people's motives, in the smallest corners where her absence now lived. But alongside the grief grew something else. Clarity. Vivien had taught me that family is defined not by DNA, but by the choices we make day after day. She had chosen me, she had stayed, and now it was my turn to choose how I would carry her legacy. I poured myself into the business, applying both the lessons she had taught and the innovations she had once resisted. We expanded our online presence, modernized our operations, and opened new locations. The employees who had respected Vivien transferred that loyalty to me, often saying they could see her influence in the way I led. Each success felt like a conversation with her, a way of proving she hadn't invested in a lost cause, as she once warned me. But the most meaningful project I undertook was the creation of the Vivien Hughes Foundation for Family Reconnection. Using part of my inheritance, I built a nonprofit dedicated to supporting children who had faced abandonment, separation, or loss of stability. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a letter from my mother. Unlike before, there were no demands, no hints about money, no attempts at manipulation. It was a simple acknowledgement of guilt, regret, and sorrow. I read it once, then placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe I never will. Maybe forgiveness is something I can offer silently, without reopening the door. Or maybe I'll choose distance forever. Either way, the choice belongs to me, and that, I realized, is freedom. Slowly, I found comfort in the relationships I already had. Mrs. Bentley, Vivien's longtime housekeeper, still came twice a week. She began sharing stories I had never heard, like how Vivien stayed up all night reading child development books the day I first arrived, terrified she wasn't cut out for motherhood. Those stories gave me glimpses into her hidden tenderness, the softer love she'd struggled to show. Thompson, my godfather by Vivien's arrangement, became a steady presence too. He was no longer just my attorney, but a mentor who treated me like family in the truest sense. And in my own heart, something shifted. The question that had haunted me for 15 years, why did they leave me, no longer held the same power. I understood now. Their leaving was never about my worth. It was about their limitations. Their absence did not define me. Vivien's choice to stay did. On a quiet spring morning, I visited Vivien's grave. Her headstone, simple black granite, bore the name she had chosen for her legacy. Beneath it, I had added one word: Mother. I laid fresh flowers, whispered a thank you, and felt a peace I had never known before. Because in the end, wealth wasn't the real inheritance Vivien left me. She gave me resilience. She gave me dignity. She gave me proof that love is measured not by promises or DNA, but by the people who show up again and again when it matters.